Right, evening everybody. I hope you can all hear me well. Can you just let me know a sec, please, if you can? Wonderful, wonderful. Please let me know if you're still hearing the music, because you certainly shouldn't be hearing the music at this moment in time. If you can, I can. That normally helps a little bit and blocks that off. Um, okay, super. So, welcome to our very first careers webinar. What I hope is going to be the first of many. So welcome everybody, students, parents, and very excitingly, there does appear to be some other alumni in the room as well, which is fab. So tonight's guest speaker is alumnus Harry Bickerstaff from the class of 2015, who is obviously going to be talking to you about his experiences studying medicine. I should also thank Hugo in year 8 for providing the lovely piece of music that we just had while we were all waiting patiently. The questions that some of you have sent through to me over the week, I've sent those over to Harry, and he has pretty much structured his presentation around them. There will obviously be an opportunity to ask further questions at the end of the session. Unfortunately, I don't have any cookies or tea or coffee to provide this evening. I do hope that you've furnished yourselves with those, but we will have obviously that opportunity to have that conversation and the questions after that as well. So please feel free to just sit back and relax, and I shall pass things over to Harry. Harry, welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the lovely music from Hugo. It's really nice to be back, and hopefully I can say things which are of a bit of use to you. And as we're going, just write your questions in the chat, and we'll collect them. And the bulk of this will be driven by the questions you're asking. So do just send them in as we're going along. So my quick background is I left in 2015 to start medicine at University of Liverpool. So I did that for 4 years, doing a number of other projects on the side, which I found interesting. Now I'm intercalating at Cambridge in a master's of kind of medicine and business coming together, and then I'll be going back in September to finish off the medical degree. And so if we go to the next slide.
There we go.
Perfect. So this is how we'll be going through it today. I'll talk for about 10 minutes at the start on some of the key things I wish I would have known more about before applying. Then the questions you sent in, I'll go through those for the next 10 minutes. And then we'll have another 30 minutes or so on questions you send in at the moment. So send those in as we're going. And then I'll wrap up with 5 minutes of kind of key take-home messages. So the next slide as well. So these are 4, and another 5th one at the end, key things that I wish I would have known or understood more when I was applying. So one of the first things is at school I never really understood just how many careers there are out there. I thought there's medicine, there's engineering, there's law, there's some other things, but really those are the main ones, and I was really wrong. It's a huge landscape, and all of you in here, I'm guessing you're most interested in medicine, and even within medicine, within healthcare, there's such a huge landscape of careers available there, from the early scientific parts of making new treatments and doing groundbreaking research, the clinical development, making new drugs, new devices, working in the hospital, working the business part surrounding it. And within each of those points, there are hundreds of specific jobs in there. So there is such a variety. And one of the key things which you could take away from this is just not to close your mind, not to close the door on any of those options, just to think of healthcare as a huge landscape and think about which part of that is best for you. And myself, I originally wanted to be a scientist, a dinosaur scientist to start with. Then I wanted to be a dentist for quite a few years. Then through various work experience, I decided to follow medicine, and now after nearly 5 years of medicine now, I don't want to work in hospitals. I want to work in the part where business and medicine meet, that area of development. So one of the things that I wish I would have done more is to skim some university careers guides to start with. So I've sent one to Mr. Maunt from Cambridge, and that has an A to Z of careers out there and what people have pursued from different courses they've taken. And I read it now. There are lots which I still don't recognise, but I wish I would have had a bit more of a look at that, opened my mind a little bit more to those. And the key thing here is really that we change. I changed from wanting to be a scientist, a dentist, a doctor, and now something else. And it's that's really inevitable, that we're going to keep changing what we think. And so, if you can, it's really good to introspect for a little bit and think about what really drives you. What are the main things which drive you? Science, helping people, other things. And maybe you don't really know at the moment. I'm not sure if I know. But the key thing is just bearing in mind that we change, and so not closing your mind to things. And another key thing is then talking to students, seeing what they've done. So the second key thing is talking to people. So talking both to doctors and to people outside of being a doctor, other allied careers, and really making the most of talking to them. Really, being nosy and seeing how do they find their job, what's their life like in this career 5 years afterwards, 10 years, 30 years or so, because they'll all have very different perspectives from when they were sitting in your shoes and in my shoes. And I think it's really important to make the most of talking to doctors and other people who aren't doctors that you look up to, that you think they have really cool jobs, and just drilling down to what drives them, and do those same things drive you, and what things do they really enjoy and really no longer enjoy about their job, and how do you feel about those? How fulfilled do they feel in their job, and do you think you feel the same way? And so that's not just doctors and work experience, which is essential though, to drill down into that when you're on work experience and even outside of work experience, but also people who aren't doctors that you look up to, that you think that's a really cool job, that you don't know what it is exactly, but that's really, really interesting. And talking to them as well, saying, okay, how do they find it? Do you think you'd be interested in that as well? And so talking to these people is really key. I've had a lot of people just approach me on LinkedIn or Student Room or through friends of friends or old lecturers or people to get advice on courses or different bits of career options. And people are always really happy to help. I've got a lot of benefit from talking to people. So approaching people that friends of friends, introductions from your family, introductions from school, or just asking people on LinkedIn, on Student Room, on other places like that, even just looking at websites and finding it that way, or on work experience. I think it's really key. I definitely undervalued talking to people and getting that experience. So the third key thing, which is more to do with applications, really. So personal statements, interviews, presentations, other bits of those jobs and applications for them, is to tell a story, a really clear, compelling story that has a clear structure from start to end. If we take the example of personal statements, people reading them, they've probably been reading them all week. They might be pretty tired. They might not have finished them. They'll be going home. They might have something to drink as well. They might be quite bored, and they're reading them pretty quickly. So it's really key to think of that in your mind. Think of the worst case scenario of who's reading your application, and think, well, I need to structure it with a really clear story, a compelling message that starts at the beginning and then reconnects at the end. And I think that's really key. And again, in interviews, your genuine interest will come out, and that's fantastic. It's also really key, though, to structure what you're saying in a clear, simple story that connects with the person that you're talking to. So I think those are some key things for writing applications, for interviews, and for presentations that you're doing, and I find that really key. So a fourth thing is to be well-rounded in your application. This applies to any application really, but I think medicine is probably the course where it matters the most. So you want to work backwards from what are the requirements on each university website, so the official university websites, and see what they want in terms of experiences, grades, skills, values, and map those against what you currently have. See what experiences do I have, what skills do I have, what values. And the really important thing is identifying the parts where they don't quite match, where you've got a gap and you perhaps don't have enough experience in one part, you don't know much about this other part. They're the uncomfortable parts. We don't really like working on parts which we're not great at, but it's really key to identify those gaps. That's where you can do the most work and really fill in the most. So for me, it was doing a bit more on the science side and doing online courses, so MOOCs online on science and medicine and drug discovery. And then also on the science side, I did some research projects with a local university to fill in that scientific gap. And the volunteering experience part, I realized I hadn't done much of that, so I had to start volunteering at a number of places and fill in that part, which is a big leap. I found it very uncomfortable, but it's the part which really matters, those gaps. And the work experience was key for me, changing my mind to pursue medicine and giving me something to reflect on and giving me a story to tell and making me understand what drives me. And the fifth point, which I've not put on here, but I think it's still important. I'm only starting to understand how important it is now, is to not be discouraged. I've been rejected plenty of times. I was rejected from 3 of the universities I applied to. Every year I'm rejected from courses or projects and things that I do. But to remember that you're choosing your course, your university, your career, as much as they're choosing you. So it's really a fit. It's not them just telling you, no, you're not good enough. It's saying, are you a good enough fit for each other? And so don't be discouraged when you inevitably have rejections, as I've had plenty. So we'll go on to the next slide. So these are the questions which were sent in. So again, just keep sending them into the chat as I go, and I'll cover them in a couple of minutes. So the first part, on what do I wish I knew before applying? I think I've covered that in that last slide. If there's more you want to know, then just send another question. I'll drill down further. Second part is applying to medical school. What do you need? So it was about 7 or 6 years since I was preparing and applying for medical school. So I'm going to be a bit out of date. The best advice I can give is to use the official university websites, see what exactly they now require, and cross-reference that against what you have. To use collated resources such as the student room and careers advice at school, where people who are doing the same thing or have experience can collate the experiences across the board of many medical schools. And I found particular help in using some sort of self-help books for applying to medical school, really going down point by point, step by step. I found that really helpful. And I think I started really about 2 years or so in advance. Giving myself plenty of time to do the work experience, to do the volunteering, do the other projects which are necessary. So the third point is, what is my work-life balance like at medical school? So medical school, you can think of it as 2 main parts: the preclinical years, which are very scientific, and the clinical years, which are mostly based in hospital. And they're 2 quite different work-life balances. So the preclinical part is quite sciencey. I remember being quite put off in the first year and the second year because I watched Scrubs and other TV shows, expecting that to be kind of like medicine and work experience as well. But it was a lot of science. So a lot of lectures and tutorials and cases to go through, and I wasn't really prepared for that. But you have a bit more time in those first few years. I remember my first year, I wanted to, the exams didn't count for my course in the first year, so I wanted to enjoy more of a social life and join more societies and things. And so that's what I did. I spent more time on trying to have a bit of a break, enjoying myself rather than going straight into work. Second year and third year, fourth year, and so on, I did more and more work as I went. And so those first couple of years, the preclinical years, they're a bit more flexible, really. It's like a classic university course. You have lectures maybe 9 till 5 with gaps in between, but after that you're free to do what you want, and you'll have plenty of gaps in between. We're based on the campus. You'll be able to see lots of friends and join societies and do plenty of things. In the clinical years, then you're based in hospital, and that's when it becomes a bit more like a job, because you're going to be there 9 till 5 or 8 till 4. And they'll normally be quite far away. So for most years, I've been traveling an hour in the morning to get there, an hour and a half to get back. So most of the year, you're leaving before the sun rises and coming back after the sun sets. And then there's all the domestic things as well. So it's a lot harder to do all those social things, to keep up with friends who aren't in hospital. So the work-life balance is quite different there. But I did a lot of work. I did a lot of research projects and other things in those evenings and free time. But equally, a lot of other people chose to have more balance with joining societies and going to see friends and traveling and things. So you can definitely still have a balance. You can balance it. It depends what your priorities are. Just gets a little bit harder in the clinical years. And so then, what were my experiences at medical school? So again, if we think of it as the first part, the preclinical part and the clinical part, the clinical was very scientific, but it did have other parts. It was a very varied course, and you get a lot of bang for your buck for studying medicine, really. So we had a lot of lectures, a lot of lecture slides, but then there were quite a few tutorials. So small group teaching, that we call case-based learning, problem-based learning, supervisions, tutorials. Places will call it different things. And for example, you're given a case of someone has asthma, you're asked a number of questions a week in advance, say, what's the disease process of asthma? What are the symptoms of asthma? How do people normally progress? What treatments do you normally give with these things? Or if it progresses, then what do you do? And you go away and you work on that in a team, or you work on it by yourself, and you come back a week later and you're there with an expert in the area. And you go through that, and you go through lots of questions for 2 or 3 hours. And they're really fun. They're very, very valuable. There's a lot of team-based work as well. So management training and other team training. We had a few times spent on army bases. And so an example there was one of us had to pretend to almost be dead. And we were in some hills somewhere. And the rest of us had to assemble a stretcher and kind of talk about what we're going to do, how do we manage this, how do we move this person across these hills and things. And then we did actually move them as well. I think a few people got hurt a little bit. And so there's still quite a bit of variety in those first few years, but they are much more scientific. And then in the clinical years, then you're going a lot more into the communications side and hospital side. So I should say as well, in the preclinical years, you're going to get quite a bit of communication training too. So that will be with actors, having a consultation with actors or with each other, and it can be quite intense. You're in front of a room full of people and an actor, and you have a video camera recording you. You have to be very professional, and then you have to watch yourself back and critique yourself. It's quite pressurized. So lots of things like that. But in the clinical years, then you're going into the real world of medicine. So you rotate throughout the years through all major medical and surgical specialities. So that goes from GP, general practice, to all parts of medicine, from pediatrics to respiratory medicine to general internal medicine and surgery. So all types of surgery. So it'll partly depend on which university you go to, because each university is going to have some slightly different specialities. Liverpool is particularly leading in neurology and public health and infectious diseases, which is topical for the moment with all the work going on there. And so those are some of the areas where there's the most chance to get involved with those specialities and learn at the cutting edge there. So that will vary university by university, and that's something worth looking at. And through the years, you progress from observing to taking part and kind of maybe being asked questions when you're sitting in, to then being, say, supervised, talking to a patient and examining a patient, to eventually you're by yourself and you're performing the full medical routine, from talking to them, examining them, performing the investigations, the procedures, sending off tests, forming the management plan with them, and then you just sign it off with the consultant in charge. So it really builds up through the years. And throughout there, you're getting a lot of communications training, a lot of team training. In hospitals, you're mostly being assessed on a portfolio of different things you have to check off, which people really love. No, it's not a great thing to have this checklist to go through, but that's how it normally works in hospital. And you'll have your written exams as well, and then you'll have practical exams as terms of exams with actors called OSCEs, and exams with real patients as well. And they're very stressful exams, most stressful things we've ever done. Yeah, so if you want to know any more detail on what my experience has been like in medical school, then just put some more questions in the chat. But that, in a nutshell, is what it's been like. And then the fifth point: does university name matter? So there are 2 points to this. The first one is if you're just going to do hospital medicine and you're going to go straight from university to hospital and you're going to work up the ladder in hospital and become a specialist there, then university name really doesn't matter, because it's very meritocratic. It's based, the scores are all kind of automated, and it's based on how you perform in exams and publications and other degrees and standardized tests. University name never comes in. There aren't really people involved that much for these things. It's very much based on how many years you have, and then you go up the rungs of the hospital ladder. For jobs outside of hospital medicine, so that could be research, still connected to medicine, or kind of part-time research with medicine. It could be jobs working with companies developing new drugs or devices, or it could be something outside of medicine in that landscape we talked about of, say, working with the other companies involved in developing treatments, financing treatments, the broader part of healthcare. And in those areas, the university name does matter. So a medical degree carries a fair bit of weight, but the name does matter in those cases. It can be just on what opportunities the university gives you to research, to meet people, to meet companies, etc. But it also matters for, if you're going to those private companies, what name they see on a CV. So it's kind of a yes and no answer to does university name matter. Okay, and then we'll go into the next slide. So have we had some questions coming in, which I can answer?
So you've got a question there from Max. What's your long-term goal? And what motivates you, and what are your key values, Harry?
Those are hard.
Take them one at a time.
Yeah. So keep sending questions in as we go, because this will be really the main part of the talk now, and I want it to be this addressing what is most interesting and useful for you. So just keep sending in questions. So to take the first one of those, what's my long-term goal? It's a good question. I kind of wish I knew, I suppose. I found that I do really enjoy science, and I really enjoy helping people, and that's why I applied for medicine. But I find the variety of working with developing new things, working on new technologies and new treatments, and seeing how business part comes in with medicine, I find that really fulfilling. So my long-term goal would be to leverage that and work in a capacity that allows me to help develop new treatments and bring new treatments to healthcare. That would be my long-term goal, really. And what motivates me, I guess it would be those things in terms of having some really interesting things to learn. The scientific side, the business side also comes in there. helping people, knowing that what I'm going to do is going to have a positive impact. That's really important, and really just finding it fulfilling and rewarding, the work which I'm doing, and that's changed through the years. As I said, my career ambitions have changed throughout the years, and I think that's going to keep changing. But those are the main things. I guess those would be my values as well. So then the next question.
Can I'm just quite interested in this a little bit as well, actually. With obviously with you now changing, I suppose, focus from initially what you thought you were planning to do, sort of, I suppose, at the start of the medical degree. Was there sort of a certain thing? Was there a certain experience or something that you had in med school that then made you start to realise that it was more sort of the applied medicine careers that you were interested in instead of actually practicing medicine?
Yeah, it's really hard to pin it down on one thing. And I think it'd be wrong of me to pin it down on one experience. I think before medical school, I certainly really enjoyed the research side and understanding how things work. I loved the part of knowing that what I was working on would have some benefit for people. That was really important. But I really enjoyed that more scientific side, I suppose. So that was from the beginning. And then moving through medicine, I guess then I found out more about that landscape of careers which are available. And that opened my eyes a bit more to what's out there, what things people can do and how much of an impact they can have, which aren't just being in hospital. And then I talked to those people. I did my research. I did research projects and really just explored my interests to try and find what I really enjoyed. And as I've gone, I think I've found more of what I really enjoy. It's been a long process, and obviously never finished. Certainly not finished now. But yeah, it's just a kind of a search for what I really find fulfilling and makes me happy, and that fits with my drives and my values.
Fab, brilliant, thank you. Louis asks, how do you get into private medicine, like setting up your own practice?
Okay, so for private medicine, in the UK, everyone will, from graduating medical school, will go into the NHS for their training. There's no way around that, really. You can leave the country to go to other places and practice. It's quite hard to do, but you can certainly do it. You can go to America and practice there, and then you'd be straight into private practice there, which is a series of private companies who run the health system. But in the UK, you have to really finish your training before you can go into private practice. So there's a whole world of postgraduate clinical medicine, which is very long. It's longer than medical school, and that is your real training. So for being a consultant, you've got probably a minimum of 8 years after medical school until you finish your training. So that's 8 years, can be 12 years, depending on what you do. GP practice, you can specialise, I think, in about 5 years at the moment, so that's faster. And it's really once you finish that training, finish those 5, 8, 10 years post medical school, that you can go into private practice. So setting up your own company or joining another company like Bupa or Virgin Care or something like that and being employed there. But again, it becomes it's really more of what you do in your 30s or 40s once you finish that training. That tends to be how it goes.
Okay, super. Anna asks, with the clinical aspect of university, did it start with watching others, or were you thrown in and instructed?
So it's a bit of both. I guess our first experiences at Liverpool anyway. So Liverpool's an integrated course. The preclinical and clinical years are quite blurred together. Other places like St Andrews, Imperial, Oxbridge, they're much more traditional. There's a 3-year split, 3 years scientific, 3 years clinical. So be different by university. But the most common is an integrated course, which is what I did. And even in the first year, we had communication and clinical interview practice with actors and with doctors. So not with patients. But we weren't thrown in with patients, but we were kind of thrown into, okay, here's a clinical scenario, work your way through it. You flail around a little bit with a doctor interviewing you or an actor there, and it was really hard. It was very fun. So you're kind of thrown in, but thrown in with uh, safety rails, and it's a very friendly atmosphere. So it was gradual. It built up. There are so it does build up, and you don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with. But there are plenty of times in medical school where it does feel very uncomfortable because you can't predict everything. You're in hospital, you're in clinics, and you don't know who you're going to see and what problems they have. They could be suicidal. They could have had any number of things. They could have any number of medical conditions. You just don't know. So there are times where it does feel like really the deep end and not what you were expecting. Hopefully that answers that.
Cool. The next few questions are actually coming from two lower sixth students, and you can slightly sense a tone of terror in their voices when they ask this question, because obviously the application process is starting to become quite real now. Jerome asks, how much time did you set aside for the UCAT revision, which was obviously back in your day, Harry, that was the UK CAT, for the UCAT revision when you were back in sixth form?
Yeah, I see. I'm probably not going to be the best person to ask about this. It better to ask someone who has just done the UK CAT, perhaps is in the first year of medical school, and I'm sure there are people you'll know from friends or that Mr. Maund will know. I did fine on the UK CAT. I didn't do amazingly or anything. I did above average, but not fantastically. I put aside probably a few weeks of kind of afternoon work on it, not a tremendous amount of time. I know that looking back, I certainly could have done more with recognizing that I was quite a slow reader, and that really hampered me in the UK CAT. So I really should have recognized that and confronted it and sped up my reading. That would have really helped, and my maths. It would have helped if I was a bit better at quick maths as well, because I didn't study that at A level. So me really confronting where my gaps were would have helped. But I think that question would be best for someone who could give you a better answer from just doing it.
That's fine. I'll just add something just very briefly to that. Jerome, now. You need to start now, okay? It's quite important. You may have, hopefully you've noticed as well, obviously on the sixth form notice board the virtual notice board that we have, that the UCAT dates have changed somewhat. There's a little bit of flexibility in there at the moment, obviously due to the current restrictions. So whereas we would have been expecting sort of the registration process to actually be starting effectively now, they've delayed that, and as a consequence, the window of UCAT applications is now further along, up to basically the end of October almost. Okay, so even though there is that, I suppose they've moved the goalpost somewhat for that. It is still really important, obviously, that you're sort of just chipping away at it. As Harry's alluded to, really. You'll find that it's much easier to handle if you do sort of just try and chip away at it in sort of a relatively steady progress instead. The other big thing, which I think is probably a change from when you sat it, Harry, is that they've also now included a situational judgment section where they will give you scenarios, and you will have sort of a multiple choice then as to how you would respond in those given situations. And obviously the rule of thumb always is that you respond just like a very, very good, well-behaved citizen would behave. Okay? So what I normally suggest to students is think about if you were answering the question in front of either your parents or maybe your dear old granny, and exactly what they would want to hear from you. That's pretty much exactly what the situational judgment round is testing you on. Okay? Right.
Yeah. If I could just say the SJT, so that is the final standardised exam we do at medical school, the situational judgment exam, and it's quite difficult. It's quite a strange exam. One of the key bits of advice I would have for that part is So you have in your head, just like Mr. Warren was saying, um, what should you do? Not what would you do in real life, but what should you do in an ideal world? And that's what you go with, that idealized answer, not the pragmatic answer.
Yeah, good. Jay asks, again, another lower sixth student, any tips as to what you would suggest somebody in year 12 should do in terms of preparation at this moment in time? So they are they have obviously started their UCAS applications now. They do have almost the advantage of a very long summer in front of them, but obviously depending on how much they can actually do under the current climate. What sort of tips and advice would you give somebody who is currently in year 12?
Okay, yeah, it's a really good question. If I think back to what I would do, I think it really comes down to looking at which courses, which universities you want to apply to, and making sure you've cross-referenced what exactly they require, and then appraising what skills you have. There are online little tests you can do for that, but also just writing down on paper, on a CV, on your statement, what experiences you have, what volunteering, work experience, scientific parts, etc., etc. What parts of those you have, and cross-reference them. And the key thing again is finding the parts where you have gaps, not building the parts which you are already strong on, because you've got less to gain there. But looking at the parts where you've got gaps and working on those, which is more uncomfortable to do. It's harder to do, but it's you get more bang for your buck by doing it that way. So things I would do, speaking generally, but again you have to take that part into account, is on the scientific side, I'd look at some online courses to do, some MOOCs, and there's lots of scope for bits which interest you. They can be on the tech side of medicine, on the drug side of medicine, on the clinical side of medicine, loads of different parts there, lots of scope. I would also say doing research with a university or a company if possible, probably more likely a university. It's a bit harder now that we can't travel, but you could try and contact the universities and see if they've got projects you could do a bit of work on at home, things you could help out with. I did that at a local university and really loved that experience. So I think if you look at there might be some other programs like Nuffield Foundation, it's one I went through. I'm sure there'll be lots of others which are more recent that have online adaptive things to do with university. And for the clinical side, yeah, so work experience is going to be a lot harder, and so is volunteering. But I think there are certainly volunteering things you can do to help out with COVID, to help out in places of need. So thinking about that, what you can do on the clinical side, and work experience. I'm not exactly sure how work experience is working at the moment in hospitals and GP practices, so I couldn't address that. But key thing is cross-referencing what they need and what you have, and finding the parts where you've got the biggest gaps, and really trying to focus on that part.
Super. Jay did actually have sort of an additional question as well. I suppose you mentioned obviously that you changed, I suppose, your aspirations, sort of over time. So, dinosaur, fossil hunter, dentist, doctor. But did you have any doubts at all about, I suppose, going down that science path?
Honestly, I don't think I did. I think I did a lot of work experience. So I started a couple of years before applying. So I did a lot of work experience, and that is one thing which really changed what I wanted to do. That talking to people, and I remember a couple of times talking to some doctors who trained as dentists. This when I was doing dental experience, and asking them, do you regret doing your job? Some of the dentists would say, or quite a lot of them would say, yes, actually, they got very bored. Some of them really loved it. But the dentists, that on the doctor side, they generally really liked their job. They really liked it. But that varied. General practice people, some of them couldn't look forward to retiring more. But it was that work experience and asking people how they felt and what they do at my stage, which really changed my mind. And so that made me very sure because my drivers, my values were very much aligned with what they were saying. That made me very confident in doing what I was wanting to do. So, yeah. Does that answer the question? I'm not quite sure.
No, I think it does. I think it does. I think Jay will jump back if I think if he needs
Yes,
a follow up from that. Anna asks a very good question. She says, "Would you say that private medicine is harder to manage?"
So I'd say for private medicine, again, it's something which you really do in your 30s. It's quite a long way down the path. So you've got your 5 or 6 years of medical school, then you've got your 5, 8, 12 years of postgraduate clinical training just to get to completing training. And then from there, you still have to do a lot of training each year to become not just a consultant, but like a senior consultant, and then do other things, become an expert. So private medicine is something which people tend to do part-time alongside their NHS work as they've finished that clinical training. You know, they're in their mid-30s or maybe 40s or so. Is it harder to manage? I think it's harder to manage if you're doing it yourself, certainly, because you're running a small business, really. Depends on what you do. You can go into someone else's business, like Bupa, like Virgin Care, there's private health insurers, and then they do the management part for you. Or you can start your own small clinic, which is a lot more work. You have to deal with the accounting side and maintaining the buildings and keeping staff on payroll and lots of things there. So it can certainly be harder to manage if you do that.
Right, super. Jessica asks, what route should you take once you reach medical school if you want to pursue a surgical career?
Yeah, good question. In medical school, it's very meritocratic on how the applications are done after medical school. So this is why university name doesn't play a role if you just want to be a hospital surgeon, a hospital medic. So it's based on how well you perform in your year. It's done in deciles. Then it's done on how many publications you have, so how many papers you publish, and if you do any other degrees, so master's degree, bachelor's degree, or something, and how you do in your end standardized exam, the judgment exam. So maximizing points in all of those is key for anything competitive. And more people want to be surgeons than there are surgical training posts. So really being performing highly in those really counts. Another thing would be talking to surgeons early on, joining a surgical society, getting surgical experience. And this wouldn't be particularly in surgery to start with. It would be more surgical research. So how effective a surgery is, auditing, improvement projects, things like that. So the research side of surgery to start and performing well in exams. And then there's the other degree, so you could integrate in a surgical degree, a master's or a bachelor's, and that would help as well.
Super, thank you. Anna's back with a very topical question for you. Do you think COVID-19 will affect medical schools and the application process, and will it change the clinical side of medical school, do you think?
Yeah, very topical question. I think the application process, yes, it will undoubtedly change it, I think, especially in terms of face-to-face interviews and interviews of actors. I think they'll be trying to minimize contact as much as possible. And doctors who normally do interviews will perhaps be more busy with clinical work, so have less time to do them. So I'm certain that universities will put in details on their website what changes they're making and make them very clear, be very transparent. So best to refer to them. I think it will probably make a virtual interview a bit more likely, or an interview where there's less people a bit more likely. I think that will probably be the main change. And then the second part to that question as well, how it would change clinical side of medical school. So the medics in my year who didn't integrate, they're now all doctors. They had accelerated graduation because they've been working in hospital. Others in the lower years have had their placements cut short, so they've been taken out of hospitals and they're doing things at home. I've heard that one plan is to have rotations, so people go in for a day and then the next day they're at home, and goes to that way for a while. So I think it will certainly have changes. If you're in the clinical part of medical school, you're likely to get a vaccine earlier, and in that case, then I think it would return to kind of normal.
Great, thank you. Magna asks, do you still have lectures or tutorials in the clinical years?
Yes, you do. So they tend to be based in hospitals more. So taught by clinicians rather than the scientists or clinician scientists. The lectures go down through the years. You can see it as a kind of gradient, highest in first year and lowest in the last year. Tutorials stay fairly consistent. Maybe they increase a bit. In fact, they probably do increase a bit, especially informal tutorials where you're having bedside teaching. You're being taught next to the patient or with the patient. That becomes a very key part of that informal teaching. So the tutorial side, it again revolves around cases. But it depends where you are. The ones I've had have been things like, say, a heart failure case. You go through 20 questions or so with lots of thrown in between, in a group of maybe 6 with 1 or 2 experts leading it. And you go through pathophysiology and symptomatology and management, investigations, etc. So it forms a big part in the clinical use.
Right, brilliant. Louis, who I think has actually put a flurry of questions in for you now. Louis asked, you mentioned earlier that you get a taste of everything, including surgery. Yep. Do you sit in on theatre?
Yeah, so it changes through the years. You would start by observing surgery. You'd scrub in, so you do the proper cleaning and you get gowned up and masks and everything. And then you'll stand next to the surgeon, normally taking the assistant's place in a case, and you can be there for as long as you want. Surgeries are very long, and they're actually quite boring if you're not doing surgery, because you're standing there for 6 hours, slowly cutting away layer of fibrous tissue after one after another. I know that for most people, after the first couple, it just gets a bit more boring. But the first 2 are fantastic. So you start by observing, and then through the years, depending on which surgeon, really, depending on how gung-ho they are, you'll assist. So you'll hold stuff, you'll use suction on bits of blood and whatever. You'll do some cutting in a little place. I remember one of the last surgeries I was in, the doctor took the time just to teach me some internal anatomy. So he said, just stick your hand there, that's the liver, wiggle it around, feel how it feels, and that's the intestines. And you can do suturing as well. So throughout the years, you do more and more parts of surgery. And that's how surgical training goes. You start by observing, then you do a little part of an operation, you perfect that little part, and then you do the next part and the next part. And over months and years, you build that up into eventually doing the surgery yourself, end to end. But by that point, you've done all of the parts within it 20 times already.
Wow. I'm just taking all of that in. Right. Louis then asks, if you decided to work abroad, would you have to restudy and take other exams?
So you wouldn't have to restudy, but you would have to take exams. So medicine is a career which is very much based on licensure, credentialing within a country. So within the UK, you can practice in the UK, but you can't practice in France or the USA, and vice versa. So if you wanted to work in America, you'd have to sit their exams, which are the United States medical licensing exams. There's I think you have to do step 3 and 3B. It's USMLE if you want to look it up. But they have very good textbooks. I would recommend the American textbooks very highly. And it's the same for the EU. You have to go to each country and sit their licensing exams in their language. But you don't have to restudy. You just have to sit their exams, which are written exams and practical exams. So you have patients and you have actors and you have doctors there assessing you. So it's kind of like retaking the final exams.
Bro, super. Dev asks, what's the best way to get work experience? So how did you go about getting your work experience from what it would have been effectively year 11 onwards, really, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so I was doing it, I think starting around year 9, year 10, just little bits, and but mostly in year 11, and year 12, I suppose. So this is where the talking to people part really comes in. If it's like it was when I was doing it, it's very much based on networking, really, and people taking a shine to you and being happy for you to come and shadow them. So that comes from simply approaching people. It's best to have an introduction. So it's best if your a family member can introduce you to them, and just a quick email or just a little chat. Say, hi, this is so and so. They're really interested in medicine. Can I have a chat to them for 30 minutes? Oh, nearly all would be very happy to. Or you can do it via school if possible. Contacts there. People perhaps in the year above or in your year who also know people. And you can approach people cold as well. Perhaps a bit more uncomfortable for you to do, but it's very good to do. If you find someone's email on a hospital website or a phone number, or even just go straight into a GP practice or hospital and try and find someone to talk to, especially in a small GP practice, that works better. Then you can just say, hi, I'm really interested in medicine. This is my CV, or just say, I'd love to learn more. Would I be able to talk to someone, one of the doctors here, and then have a quick chat and say, could I come sometime to shadow you for an hour or for half a day? And normally they'll be very happy to. It's a bit can get your heart rate up, I suppose, going in without knowing anyone there, but it's a fine way of doing it. People are very friendly normally.
Great, super. The other thing I would add to that as well is that we are very fortunate as a school that we do have sort of a very large sort of medical community within school, not just our alumni, but obviously also our medical parents as well. So that ends up being a very good networking opportunity, with the variety of careers events that we have on in school as well. So always, you might feel like you're being a little bit cheeky, but you're not. If you see an opportunity, it's always best to ask rather than to go home and wish that you had. Right, let's see, what's the next one? So Louis again has asked, can you be a GP but specialise in a specific field?
Yeah, so it's a good question. You can, and that's a fairly new development. So general practice, it takes about 5 years to become a fully trained general practitioner after medical school. But after that, you can also pursue other exams in, say, dermatology is a very common one, studying of the skin. Obstetrics and gynecology can be quite common. And so people study those as their specialities, and you can become a GP of a special interest. And some people go a step further and even become duly qualified in a speciality and in general practice. So you can certainly do that. It's quite far down the line. So you'd be doing that probably more like 10 years postgraduate. So it's a bit down, but you can certainly do it.
Right, clever. Another one from Anna as well. Anna said, obviously, earlier we discussed about the papers that you'd written, and she'd like to know what sort of things did you write about? Do you have the complete freedom, I suppose, to write about any given topic, or is one allocated to you? And how hard did you find them to write?
Yeah, good question. So papers, by papers I'm referring to academic papers, so scientific literature published in scientific journals. So you see lots of them being published and referred to in the newspapers, especially at the moment, often being fairly badly referred to in the newspapers, if I'm honest, because they're very densely written and they're not written for mass media, which I think is a problem. But so So they're quite specialised. Normally you do those by talking to and working with a specialist, a senior doctor or a researcher clinician, and you work on one of their existing projects. And medical schools often help with this. So Liverpool was very heavily into research. From year one, you're doing research projects with researchers. Other medical schools don't really go into the research side much. So that's something to look at again and see which place to choose. So I chose Liverpool partly because of how into research it was. And so from there, I met a lot of researchers. Again, it was which ones I got on well with, which ones I clicked with, and which ones thought I was doing good work. And then I contributed to parts of their papers, and I was an author on those. And I wrote my own based on projects given to me from them and given to me from medical school as necessary parts of the course, and I published those. They're hard to publish. It's a long process. It's quite a boring process, the publishing part. So the best way is getting someone senior to help you step by step, really.
Super, thank you. Louis's got a little bit worried here in this next question. Louis, don't worry, you're fine. He says, I'm in year 10 at the moment, so I'm slightly worried about how my GCSE results will be affected by the inevitable shift in quality of learning because of the change to remote learning. Do you think it would be harder for people who are in a position where their results might not be at the standard they could have been in an ideal situation to get into medical school or get a good job?
So I think the main thing I'd say on this is don't panic. It's okay. There are lots of exams. I've got exams every year, and each year I just panic a little bit less about them because I realise they don't have that much impact in the end on my life. And I think a key thing is you're all in the same boat of every other school around the country, around the world even. So it's not isolated, and everyone's in that same boat. So don't worry about being treated unfairly. People will recognise it. I'd defer to your teachers really, following their advice on how best to learn at home. They're going to know best, and I'd go with that. I think you can do great work at home. I've found it quite good for my dissertation at the moment, giving me a lot of time and focus on it. So you can try and turn it to your advantage if possible.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Harry said there as well, I would sort of say that yes, obviously everybody's in the same boat at this moment in time. Okay, as a result of that as well, the medical schools will have to sort of slightly shift, I think, a lot of what they expected their general ideas of entry requirements would be. So as a consequence, obviously, for this year, for those students who are currently in year 12, whereas normally the medical schools would sort of say, we'd really like you to get, sort of a week's work experience if possible, and then sort of continued volunteering. The medical schools know that this is pretty difficult at this moment in time. So as a result of that, for this cycle's application, we are still waiting, obviously, for further updates from the medical schools, and we'll be expecting that those, obviously, there will be a little bit more leniency compared to what they would have done previously. But the other thing that I would say as well is that you are all in great hands. Okay, in terms of the provision that you guys have had, sort of with the remote learning, and in comparison to schools where they've either had no remote learning going on at all, unless you call having an email of work, of a task submitted, and then you then email the work back, and then you then get emailed feedback, but in sort of a very sort of sporadic sort of way. The level of sort of direct engagement that you're having now with your staff and having those live online lessons, that's just that's so advantageous to you in comparison to other people in the country. So much so that I would even suggest that I don't think that actually the remote learning, from the way that we're delivering it, has probably impacted your impacted your abilities at all. On a daily basis at this moment in time, I'm in awe of what we're actually delivering on a daily basis, and just sort of feel very fortunate to actually be working where I work, and with you guys as well, who are being so proactive and coping with all of this as well. So obviously, to mention Mr. McEwen's favourite buzzword, tenacity, you are all showing oodles of tenacity right now, and I think that for you, understandably, you do have concerns, but moving on into the future, and with the flexibility that the medical schools, I think, probably will have to show, not just for this year's application, but probably for the next few years. You're in good hands. You're in good hands, Louise. Don't worry. Right. Okay. Next one. Anna's asking, do you have to watch the surgeries? Bit of a squeamish question there, Anna.
So I think you do have to go to a certain number of surgeries. It's not very many, and you can choose the least bloody ones you like. Perhaps avoid orthopedics where they've got big drills. But throughout medical school, you do have to perform procedures such as taking blood, and in some, it causes the patient a fair bit of pain actually if you're getting arterial blood gas, or doing other more invasive procedures. So those to be honest, are one of my least favourite parts, because it does cause someone a bit of pain. So I really dislike those, but they are a necessary part. Unfortunately, there's no getting around that.
Okay, cool. You've also piqued Anna's interest as well when you mentioned getting a little bit of work experience while you were in year 9. But she's obviously found at this moment in time that her age will limit, sort of the types of work experience that she could get.
Yeah, so I suppose I got it through friends of my family. So again, it's who you know, but it's also how you know them. Kind of unfortunately, but you can get around that by just going into ask people very nicely, and I'd say the more senior doctors would generally be more laissez-faire with their approach. They'd be quite happy to let you in, even if you're a little bit below the typical age of work experience. But really, for work experience, what matters is how you learn from it, how you reflect on it. And so you can get really good work experience by just talking to people outside of work. And that would be having someone over for, having a Skype call perhaps, and really seeing, probing them, how do you feel now, 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years from starting? How have things changed? How do you find your work? Are you fulfilled doing it? How happy are you doing it? And again, trying to see, are the things which drive them similar to what drives you? What are their values like? And really being nosy. So you can get that from just talking rather than the work experience side at that younger year.
Great, thanks. Louise just asked as well, just to think a follow-up from the dissertation conversation that we've had. How did you choose your topic? If you're in medical school, does it have to be medicine related?
So in medical school, it has to be something medical related normally. Different schools will do it differently. I had a series of research projects which built up throughout the years on various topics, which I chose which topics they were, and within those topics I had flexibility to decide with my supervisor what would be the best topic for me to look at. So there's certainly flexibility there. And I did extra projects which I chose entirely on my own, on my own volition, and in the areas I was interested in, some falling outside of medicine. But for medical school, they're going to be pretty related to medicine. For intercalation, which I'm doing now in a master's, others can do lots of other degrees. You can intercalate in anything you want. You can intercalate in a language, or plenty of people do it in law actually, or a number of other subjects. Mine is business and kind of healthcare coming together, and there your dissertation will be as different as the courses.
Great, thanks. Now we've got a lovely part now. So obviously I'm going through these comments chronologically, and we have got another one of our alumni actually in the Skype call at the moment as well. Lizzie. Lizzie is she's studying medicine at Edinburgh, and she left AKS 2 years after Harry did. Okay, but Lizzie's just added here for you. To answer Harry's response, I mainly revised for the UCAT during the summer. I found an online course to be super helpful and worth the money as it provided lots of practice questions. I ended up rescheduling my exam for 2 weeks later as I didn't feel ready. I'm not sure I felt completely ready, but definitely more prepared. Not sure whether you were still able to move your exam date, but I think feeling prepared is definitely important. Also read a sciencey passage before you go in to warm your brain up. Medical schools are definitely aware that it will be harder to gain work experience at the moment, but I think you can show initiative just by reaching out to people. There's also a good read on the Medic portal called 5 Ways to Build Your Personal Statement During Lockdown. Oh, excellent. Thank you, Lizzie. Other prep, make sure to chat to people, find blogs, books to read, medical students, doctors, whoever. Ask what their days look like and get a feel for it. I think everyone studying medicine has had doubts at some point. Just important to make sure you're happy with your reasons for choosing that path, and also think about similar careers and degrees such as biomedical sciences. MOOCs are great for seeing whether you enjoy the science behind medicine, learning the background to diseases, human anatomy, etc. Yeah, that's fab, Lizzie. Thank you for that. I would sort of say that it's really, really important that, especially for the lower sixth at this moment in time, I would just say with you obviously thinking about your personal statements at the moment, remember what we said in one of the recent enrichment sessions. They want to see that not only that you're reflective, and you're taking on board obviously the experiences that you've managed to acquire, whether or not they are in person or the experiences from just reading journals and sort of taking part academically. But the other thing obviously with this as well is that you do actually still have, hopefully that scientific interest, that enthusiasm to just sort of sate your curiosity by reading this stuff as well. So having all of that just sort of creates then obviously this persona in the personal statement of you just being a very enthusiastic, sort of inquiring person who not only, if you do decide obviously that you want to go into practicing medicine, that there's the human element to it, but at the same time you like the challenge. You like the challenge of reading all of this up to date, scientific research. Right, let's see. Oh, I think and then we've hit the bottom, Harry, which is very exciting. We do have, if there are any other extra questions to pop in, that would be great. But at the same time, even though I didn't actually allocate a certain time, we have sort of gone over, I suppose, our hour mark. Is there any final takeaway things that you would like to pass on to them, Harry?
Yeah, can we go back to the slides for a second?
Yeah, please. Do you want me to move on to the next one?
Yes, please. And thank you, Lizzie. That was a really helpful message. Helpful on lots of things. I think Lizzie is certainly in a better place for me to talk about the UKCAT, having done it much more recently. Are you sharing your screen at the moment?
Yes. Are you frozen on slide 5?
I'm still seeing just all the. I'm not seeing any slides at the moment.
Oh, you're not? Oh dear. Right. Okay. Let me just let me think. What might have happened? Right. What I'll do is we'll try and do a little reboot if need be and see if that works. Right, how's that for you, Harry? Has that helped at all?
Oh no, I still can't see anything at the moment.
Okay.
It's all right. I can wrap up with some take-home messages. Um, just get the slides up for me so I remember. Okay. So I think there'd be kind of four key parts I wish I would have known more about and understood more, and that I really hope you can take away as key messages. So the first one is careers. The healthcare is not just hospital medicine. It's a vast ecosystem, and it has lots of really fascinating careers for people of all drivers and all passions. And I've found mine doesn't lie in hospital medicine anymore. It lies in consulting in drugs and devices and that venture capital side. So I'd really encourage you to look at those other options, and certainly not to close any doors. The Cambridge Careers Guide I sent to Mr. Maunda, I think would be a really good read just to flick through for 10 minutes and see what you find of interest, and see what other people have done. And the second key part would be to really talk to people, to make the most of talking to people or finding people to talk to. So to get insight from them, people that you find really interesting, they've got really cool jobs, even though perhaps they're not hospital doctors, or they are hospital doctors, and really being nosy, digging down into what insight they give, what perspective they have now, what advice they provide. And then the third key point would be in your applications and in your interviews and in presentations to really tell a story, to have that clear structure, that compelling, succinct message that really connects with the person on the other side. I think I found that key. I found that more and more important through the more projects and more things I've applied to. And the final thing would be for medicine, above anything else, to be well-rounded, to make sure that you've looked on a case-by-case basis of university and medical school what they require, what they want, what they desire in applicants, and introspecting and seeing what you have, what are your drivers, what are your values, if you can if you can try and dig down to that, but also what are your experiences, what are your skills, what are your grades, but I think key would be what are the experiences there, and finding those gaps, finding okay, what's the part I could put some time into that's going to have the most impact for the amount of time that you're putting in. So I think being well-rounded in your application, doing a number of things on the science side or the clinical side, wherever those gaps are, the parts which really interest you, I think that's key. And the final point would be just remember that you're choosing university and course and employer as much as they're choosing you. So I've been rejected plenty of times. I get rejected every year. So it's inevitable. People will face rejections, and don't be disheartened by it. It's not someone saying you're not good enough. It's a two-way thing. It's do they fit for you, and do you fit for them? And so I think that's important. So this will be my 5 take-home messages. And thank you very much for sitting through. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer a few by email. But hopefully that's helped a little bit. Thanks very much.
That's been fab, Harry. Thank you so much. Yes, if any of you sort of once obviously we've finished up, if you do suddenly realise that you do have another question, or if questions come to you over the days, if you want to send them to me, I'm more than happy to sort of just collate them and hold on to them over the next week, and then I'll then send any further questions over then to Harry that way. Okay. Thanks so much for joining. I hope you found it as informative as I have. It's been absolutely fab, and also it's been an absolute delight just to sort of reconnect with Harry and with Lizzie with the conversation box as well. So that was absolutely fab. Okay, thanks very much. Have a good evening. Drive safe.